We're reading the next chapter of EVERNIGHT by Ross Mackenzie. It's chapter 54. This is our book. The chapter's called Face to Face. It happened so quickly. Double A gave a roar and fired one of the sunlight spells from his wand at Shadow Jack. In a tangle of darkness, Shadow Jack became a raven, avoiding the spell, arrowing through the tunnel towards them. Before he could fire another spell, the raven snatched the wand from Double Eight's hand. Lara spun around, her wand raised, trying to see what was going on, only to find the raven swooping down on her, taking her wand too. The light spell went out, and thick, inky blackness pushed in on them. "Lara! Double Eight, you hurt?" "No." The sewer stream gurgled over their soaking feet in the dark. Fush, fush, fush. Double Eight let out a cry. "Don't move, girl," said Shadow Jack's voice from the blackness. "I have a knife at your friend's throat. Ordinarily, I would finish the job here and now, but Mrs. Hester wants to do it herself this time. So you climb to the surface like a good girl, eh? Don't try to run. Don't try anything smart. If you do, I'll bleed him dry. Now, move." Lara began to walk. Her mind raced, filled with 100 different possibilities, ways she could try to escape, try to throw him off. But every option put Double Eight in danger, and she would not have that. She did as he asked. She found a ladder and began to climb to the surface. And when she pushed the manhole cover up and broke out into the freezing mid-Evernight air, she found that some of the street lamps here were still burning. The street was deserted. The chaos had not yet found its way here. "Move," said Shadow Jack again, his knife still pressed to Double Eight's throat. "To the church up the hill." Over the icy cobbles they went, to the old church at the corner of Cinnamon Lane. Shadow Jack directed them around the crumbling ancient building to the graveyard around the back. It was an overgrown, mostly forgotten place, and the church itself had fallen into disrepair. Lara pushed through trees and bushes, tripping over fallen headstones until they came to a clearing where the stars would usually have shone. But there were no stars. Mrs. Hester waited amongst the graves, the light from her wand falling upon the headstones, all jutting and broken like rotting teeth. Shadow Jack threw Double Eight down, then went to Mrs. Hester's side and handed her the wands he'd taken. Mrs. Hester examined them under the light of her own wand. Pretty things. Hags always did have an eye for wand making. Such a shame you'll never get to use them for anything great. She tossed the wands to the ground, then approached Lara. "You, my dear, have caused me more trouble than I care to admit. But not to worry. It'll be over soon enough." As she was talking, Mrs. Hester was fishing in her pockets, and she brought out a spell of darkest red with a core that looked like a black spider. She loaded the spell into her wand, and it lit up in the chamber. My own version of a death spell. I've had a long time to get it right. Lots of practice. You'll feel pain before you go, I promise you that. She smiled and fished in another pocket. This time, when she brought out her hand, Lara saw Moonwing in her palm, still and dead. "What have you done to him?" She lunged forward, but Shadow Jack kicked her away. "I want you to know," said Mrs. Hester, "that you've failed, girl. You are the last of the Doomsday Coven, and you are the one who has lost. You are the one who has given me the spell. All your efforts, all this time, were for nothing. What would your mother think?" Lara stared up, clenching her teeth. "Don't you talk about my mother." "Oh, but she'd be so disappointed, wouldn't she? After all, she died so you could live. She protected you from Shadow Jack, and for what, eh?" Lara's eyes flicked to Shadow Jack standing still beside Hester. You killed my parents. It was you coming to get her? He stared down at her, emotionless. She suffered, you know, said Mrs. Hester, obviously enjoying herself. Greatly. He ate her soul. It's what he does. Lara thought she would vomit on the frozen grass. As for you, Hester said to Double Eight, well, what shall we do with you, eh? I'm going to make sure every second of the rest of your life is agony, boy. You will pray for every breath to be the last. But I'll keep you alive. I'll dream up new ways to make you suffer. Something caught Lara's eye. Did she see? Had there been a twinkle of light in Moonwing's sapphire eyes? Hester pointed her wand at Lara. The death spell flared. Lara closed her eyes, hoped, prayed. Please, please let it work. Moonwing, now! Mrs. Hester paused. She lowered her wand. She looked at her other hand, where Moonwing was now sitting up in her palm, his shining head twitching to one side, sapphire eyes fixed on her. It's awake! Moonwing exploded upwards at her face, his sharp beak piercing her right eye. She screamed and staggered back, clawing at her face, blood gushing from the half-empty eye socket. Lara dived forward, grabbing the two wands on the ground, tossed Double Eight his, and rolled to her feet. Double Eight jumped up and fired a sunlight spell straight at Mrs. Hester. It hit her in the chest, sending her flying back, crashing through a crumbling headstone. Her wand went spinning across the graveyard. Shadow Jack took a step towards Lara, and another. Lara raised her wand, knowing that the magic would not stop him. Stay back. I'm warning you. He took another step, getting closer now. Too close. Lara tripped on a root and fell back. Somewhere in Lara's mind, a memory lit up. Nell Pepper had given her a spell. A thread of pure moonlight from the clouds. It'll bind anything. She rolled across the grass, reached into her coat, brought out the bottle, and loaded it into the chamber. Then, with barely a moment to spare, she raised the wand and, as Shadow Jack's hand came down on her shoulder, she fired. A thread of moonlight erupted from the wand, wrapping around Shadow Jack again and again, the way a spider might wrap its prey in web. He yelled and screamed and fought, but the moonlight held firm. Lara felt the wand shake with the power of the spell, the heat of it on her face. The smell of it was hot metal, and the wind that came from it blew her hair wildly around her head. She curled her lip to a hateful sneer, enjoying the pain she was causing him. Is this what it was like for my mum? She asked. Is this the sort of pain she felt? Is it? She moved the wand, and the binding grew tighter, squeezed him so that his eyes popped wide, and black veins stuck out on his face, his neck. Still she squeezed. Lara had waited a lifetime for this, to finally take all her frustration, her suffering, her loneliness out on someone, anyone. She walked forward, the spell pushing him against an old oak tree, the heat of it making the bark smoke. And in her mind, there was no doubt. She was going to kill him. Across the graveyard, Double Eight gave Mrs. Hester a kick. She did not respond. She lay awkwardly on her side, her head buried in the crook of an arm, the other arm flailing out wide behind her. Double Eight gave her another kick. Nothing. A shape in the folds of her coat caught his eye, and he reached down and found that she'd been carrying, in one of those impossible pockets, a small, ancient-looking urn. Double Eight turned it in his hands. A moment's distraction was all Mrs. Hester needed. She lunged at him. Double Eight dropped his wand, and she dragged him to the ground and began clawing and tearing at his face with her long nails. He tried to protect himself, to keep his hands up, but she was strong, and angry. Her white blonde hair was dyed red with blood, and her right eye mostly gone. She screamed incomprehensible things at him, spitting on him, ripping at his flesh. He could not fight her off.